workforce alignment effort forward? And how can we assess whether or not we're making progress in these areas? So toward that end, we have a specific measure that Kathy and Rachel helped to develop, and we want to kind of think through, how could this maybe work as an indicator, and also as an opportunity to really organize action in the region. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Rachel to give us a little quick trip through the data workshops.
Leslie's going to do a couple more framing slides.
Okay.
Sorry, Sorrel.
Oh yeah, right.
Just a couple. Just to talk about the lens that we asked everyone to put on throughout this journey, and then also that we're hoping that we continue to use, which is be open to this journey. That the data that we look at is possibly wrong, definitely incomplete, and that we don't know what we don't know, and that we're still learning not only about the data, the platforms, what they can do for us, but also about each other and our roles in working with data. A couple of questions to consider. What does it mean to bring an equity lens to this work? I feel like that's a question that we use and we probably should be using every single day. What does it take to be a best consumer and producer of data? And then how can we continue to improve the system? And I think that's our role for today, and our partnership always is, what can we do together to make sure that we improve the student experience? Next slide, please. And so we spent 12 hours of learning about Inland Empire Desert data together. And because of that, we all deemed our participants Inland Empire data geeks, and we gave everyone an award. And Wendy calls herself a data diva. Oh, we should get
I like that one. That's nice.
A button that says it.
Do you? If we were all together, it would be great. We should have that, a ribbon, and then maybe buttons for everyone. So next time. Okay, next slide. And then the last slide. I've always loved this slide because I think this also talks about just what an important role that we have and how powerful data is. So we went on this data journey together that is actually moving us closer to collective action. We compiled a picture of what we know. So how many students are completing college? In how many years? What majors? So now our purpose today is to figure out, well, what can that collective action look like? Next slide, please. All right.
Thanks, Leslie. So as Zorel said, we wanted to give you for those that were not there, some of you, this is a repeat from workshop 4, wanted to give you a very brief synopsis of the data that we shared. We did kind of a highlight reel when we met in December, and wanted to share that as a basis before Kathy shares this potential measure. And we started here. This is the kind of data we started with around the Insight Center's Family Needs Calculator. We want to make sure that people were grounded in the workshops to this understanding about what living wage is in the IE. And this calculator estimates it costs around $50,000 for a family of 4 to meet their very, very basic needs in the IE. So we want to make sure that we're always looking at that number and what jobs can get our folks there. We started also reviewing in September the data from California Competes that demonstrated that there's a significant disparity about who earns living wage by race and gender in the Inland Empire. We had Mike Goss share from Centers of Excellence and the data from PPIC that the living wage jobs that are growing in the IE require at least some level of college education. The majority of opportunities are in middle skill or above jobs in the Inland Empire. Yet those jobs and careers are highly concentrated within specific regions, or sorry, sectors within the region. That was the data that that Kimberly Collins shared with us. We also learned from California Competes data that they had compiled that many people have not attained any college in education in the IE. And of those who do attend college, they're attending community colleges at the highest rates of all post-secondary options. In fact, the majority of all post-secondary enrollment is in the community colleges across all demographic groups other than Asian American students. We learned from Dr. Konatsu that some local students are beginning their freshman year or reaching transfer to Cal State San Bernardino. many of whom are majoring in psychology and other programs of study. Yeah, we also learned from Dr. Lee that less than 28% of Riverside County students are completing college within 6 years in this data set that she shared. And from California Competes that pathways to college and the related preparation varies widely by race and gender and special populations. We heard some very new data from Maya Clayton Ramos from CCGI that according to the self-reported data that high school students have a very broad set of career interests, as you'll see here. And we started talking about the possibility that this probably means that some students are not getting guidance around their choices. You'll also find that they were adding careers but not majors. So this idea that many students may not know how to get into the pathways to reach goals that they might even be interested in. We heard some really great data also from Dr. Olivares that college students at the community college level are saying that they don't feel connected or have a strong sense of why they're there. And to further understand the guidance that community college students have or don't have, Dr. Olivares shared from her research that the students are saying they have little support to make decisions about careers and have opted to ask or observe family members and use Google searches as their primary source of majors and pathways. And all of these challenges are before the devastation of COVID that it will have and has had to the region's economy. Mike Goss shared this data around the 13.3% of people, employment falling 13.3% between February and April. There was a bit of recovery in June, and then as of September 2020, still down 10.2%. There were significant hits to the hospitality industry with over 30% of jobs being lost since February 2020. This led us into an MZ analysis that Ali did for us, where we discussed the skills that are needed now and in the future to help students be more resilient, both in this economic crisis and future downturns. We learned from Dr. Collins about the efforts that Cal State San Bernardino is undergoing to partner with Chaffey and Cajon High School, using dual enrollment in high school courses to transfer to Chaffey and then to a bachelor's degree program aligned with in-demand jobs. We heard from Roman Stearns from Scaling Student Success about the work that he's doing with K-12s to develop graduate profiles. This is an effort to strengthen the coherence of competencies that can help students more seamlessly transition to college and career. Angelica Ibarra and Leslie Valmonte shared the Community College Guided Pathways framework, and we talked about that potential of guided pathways to help the IE reorganize better than a Marie Konto closet. They also shared the development of meta majors in the region, and this idea that you can cluster programs of study that can help augment and onboard students in a more cohesive way and support community college students' success. We also explored the work that Wested's been doing around aligning meta majors on these opportunity maps that connect jobs to associated high demand skills in the IE with programs of study. And then we also heard from Jarlath and Yusuf around their platform Job Speaker that can help students navigate towards living wage jobs and could help us learn in the region about what students want and need to become more financially self-sufficient. And as you all probably know, this is a resource that's become available for all IE community colleges. We went through all of this, and I know it's a Reader's Digest version, so I'm happy to share the slides afterwards so you can absorb a bit more and we can discuss. But all of this, and we all were very thirsty for more information. We didn't think we had a lot more questions, and when we asked folks at the end of workshop for what else they want to know about at the end of the series, they mentioned half of them split down the middle. They want to know where students are going who aren't transitioning to college at all, because there is a significant population of students that don't make it to college, and then what would help students come back who have stopped out. but all this in the end, we shared this common perspective, and we talked about quite a bit in December, that there just is no perfect data. No matter how much we tried, we found we got a lot more from triangulation around this question around alignment between education and employment, and that we had this thought, and this is where Kathy's presentation came in, about how do we get to something that we can look at that's not going to capture everything, but get us to start moving together on a strategic place. And that led us into this idea of a threshold of good rather than perfect, that Sorrel's going to share a bit of where we got to.
Yeah, so just to follow up on what Rachel is explaining, we wanted to think about how could we understand when we're making progress in these efforts. How can we measure that? How can we understand what's happening, what's working? And we try to think about, like, is there some sort of indicator? You know, ideally there'd be a way to measure what's the alignment of education and workforce in our region. Oh, it's 0.8 or something like that. You know, no such thing exists like that. So that's why it's like, what makes a good, even if we know it's imperfect in terms of a measure. Some of the criteria that seem to make sense would be, it's simple, something that everybody can understand and measure easily, widely available. So, you know, all community colleges either have or could pretty easily get this information. Preferably a leading rather than a lagging indicator. We'd like to understand something where we can intervene and work sooner in a student's trajectory rather than later. And then, of course, very important to us that it has a clear equity impact. So it can be disaggregated. We know that there's a lot of racial sorting that's happening in terms of what students are studying, where they're going, what their long-term outcomes are. So we want to be able to understand it in those terms. Something strategic. So we thought, well, this aligns well with guided pathways work. It could be easy to layer it in with some of the existing efforts in the region. Actionable. And this, you know, I think Kathy will probably speak to this too. You know, if we think about where we can have an impact, we have limited influence on the economy, although of course we are also working on economic development. We're partnering on all of that, but really we have a lot more opportunity to influence what's happening in the schools and with our students than on the economy. And then, you know, looking for something that's applicable to intersegmental and collective impact work across the region. So those were some of the things that we thought about when we were trying to imagine what measure exists or could easily exist that could meet some of these criteria.
Thanks, Sorrel. So that led us into Kathy Booth's presentation in December, and she's going to give a condensed version of that presentation about this proposed measure. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. So last time I led everyone through a journey to sort of back you into the possible metric. This time I'm actually going to lead with what it is, and then we're going to talk about why. And the idea is that you would be looking at how many students are earning the interdisciplinary or non-specific associate's degree that is highly prevalent in California community colleges, with the goal of reducing the number of students who are earning that award, in the goal that they are earning an award in something specific. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So I want to sort of talk you through why I think that might address some of the priorities that got discovered through this inquiry process. And before I jump into these slides, I just want to give you a couple of tidbits. So I've been working with the national leadership for guided pathways for actually close to a decade, including some of the early work that was done before guided pathways emerged as a concept. And in the beginning, when people talked about measurement, they were really focused on things that you could see in the first year, because everyone was worried that it's so hard to make big change. And so that's why if you look at the guided pathways dashboard that's on the launch board, which is aligned with the national work, it's really focused on, are students getting through that transfer level English and math? Are they getting to a certain number of units? But what happened in the evolution of the thinking about guided pathways is that we sort of forgot the importance of learning something specific. So it is very important to get a bachelor's degree. It's very important to get an associate's degree or a certificate in something that is related to the job market, but that is not enough, especially because of the sorting we see and who gets into what major. So I recently was involved in a study that was looking at a large region, and we saw a disproportionate number of African-American women ending up in this non-specific degree, which has no labor market value and does not support transfer well. And yet this continues to be one of our most common awards in the community college system. And so the idea is, absent that, what could they get? And that is where Guided Pathways comes in, and that's where all this other work is going to fit together. So with that background, let's go ahead and sort of hop through these slides. So Searle's actually already covered like how we really want to have something that's measurable, easy to get to, not pie in the sky, and doesn't create a false sort of sense that there's this linear pathway between your education and your career. Next slide. So part of this really, when you're building a metric, is you should be clear what your theory of change is, because if you want somebody to look at something, they need to know why. And I think that one of the things that's really challenging as an educator is that you can't fix the economy. So you can watch the heartbreak of the hollowing out of middle skills jobs or industries moving out of your region. And as colleges, it's almost impossible to hold an industry in place, especially in the IE, where so much of this depends on small businesses that as the alternative to working in the Amazon warehouse. And so really what's important is that we're all focusing on what we can do with students. And a lot of that is going from the I want to be a singer to figuring out how you could take that creative talent and put it toward a job that you can both stand and that is going to enable you to pay the rent. Next slide. So one of the things that is really hard is that we've fallen into this trap of this conversation of the skills gap, as if there was just like a couple of majors that are going to guarantee a future for students. And you've just seen that not happen in your own communities. So rather than chasing the skills gap that says that it's, I mean, we always want to talk about welding and nursing when we talk about labor market data, because we think it's a really clear, pathway through. But people's career pathways are wiggly. Look at your own. It probably wasn't linear. Next slide, please. So the next thing we say, looking at this sort of evolution of thought, is that there actually is value in almost every single program that community colleges offer. So often we get in this dichotomy that says, like nursing and health is good, social sciences is bad. But if small business is the heart of your economy, doing something in psychology might make you a really good business owner, because you either understand sort of how to get to people so they want to buy your product, or you're a really good manager. And so we should be looking at the ways that every single major, not just narrow CTE majors, help prepare people for work. Next slide. So this is an exercise I just want to do real fast because I think it's helpful. This is based on a data set that WestEd has, where we looked at people with bachelor's degrees in particular disciplines in the IE and determined what jobs they ended up in. So my question is, looking at these two charts, what do you think these two majors were that people got their bachelor's degree in? You can unmute and share your thoughts or chat. What do you think the one on the left is?
Social sciences.
Why do you think it's social sciences?
Because you have teachers and counselors and social workers, secretaries, all the way
What
down.
about the
Working with people, lots of working with people. And it's also, yeah.
Communication studies, psychology, something in the social sciences.
What about the one on the right?
General business.
Any other guesses? It's not easy to tell, right? Go ahead and do the next slide. There's my reveal on it. Okay, so the one on the left, you're right, was social and behavioral science, but the one on the right was STEM. And what I think is really interesting about this is I've, blocked out the ones that are specific to the discipline, and all of these things that you still see are essentially the same between being a social science major and being a STEM major, which we think of as the pathway to the future. So whatever students studied in college, they end up as teachers, as administrative assistants, as managers, they work in sales. And Look at the red box on the right. This is a category of people who didn't end up in a job. So we think of STEM as the golden ticket, but somehow in the IE for these students, it wasn't, which may not be that the skills weren't valuable. It may just mean that they don't know how to translate it. So part of this is my thinking that you shouldn't be telling students, no, you have to go do STEM because that's where the good jobs are, because you might end up in the same job doing something that you love better, that makes you want to stay in school, that helps you build a broader skill set that aligns with your passions. Next slide. The other thing that I really worry about is that, especially when we're talking about all of those retail jobs that get lost, when those students come back to us, if they find us, do we say to them, you just need to get another job? We're going to give you a very narrow skill set that's just about paying the rent, and thereby deny them access to those 21st century skills that are really common in people that move up into managerial positions? That we run the risk of reinforcing bias in our society by moving folks into those lifeboat jobs, by saying, stick with a short-term CTE program, rather than saying, go ahead and get that psychology degree, because that's what's going to prepare you for the durable job. Because if you look at some of those higher order skills, scheduling, planning, project management, those are things that you can learn in lots of different disciplines that we teach in our colleges. Next slide. So really part of this theory of change is that if you have a coherent set of skills, it almost doesn't matter what you do it in, you're going to be better equipped to be able to figure out how to get into a job, because you'll know something specific, especially if we can help students translate how those skills relate to the workforce. So if those STEM students weren't getting jobs, was it because they couldn't articulate the value of their ability to solve problems or things like that? And that is something that community colleges can do for students, especially first-gen students that don't know how to talk about the relationship of psychology to being a business owner. Next slide. So this is the list of the most common awards that are given out in the IE. I pulled this from Datamart. And what I notice is that if you crosswalk those to the resilient skills that Ali showed you, social science and business, education, these majors prepare you for those resilient skills that are really important for getting jobs in your region. What worries me, next slide, is this issue of the interdisciplinary major. It is the third most common major, and we just don't know what it's there for. And I think it's a vestige of how we used to think about it. Any award will do, but that's not true, because it means that you don't have that sense of coherency, you don't know how your skills fit together, and you certainly don't know how to tell employers what they are. Next slide. So this is something that comes out of work that was done by CCRC, where they are then not only looking at what are people majoring in, but they're looking at who is in what major. And I think this is equally important to examining the prevalence of the non-specific interdisciplinary degree, because I think you're going to see a lot of tracking of your students once you start to look at where they're headed. And that's a place where you can make a really big difference. So it's not that you're saying to Latina students, don't go into social sciences. You're going to make sure that they understand how to translate those skills into what goes forward. And you're definitely going to pay attention if you see that steady trend where all of your Black students are ending up in that non-specific major, because that means they're not getting the benefit of the same guidance that's going to help them get into a coherent set of skills. Next slide.
Kathy, can I ask a
Oh,
question?
absolutely.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please? You're laying out a great argument, but it's predicated on the thought that within the social sciences and business and education, arts and humanity, there's a clear understanding of what those skills are. And that is, we are so far away from that why not just create the skills that are related to an interdisciplinary study? Why not bring those skills down to the class level or the course level that then students could build up? When we speak with the community college folks, the faculty in the schools, they are learning now that they have to deal with Pillar 5. Right? They have to think about this transition, and they are going back now and identifying those particular targets, the skills that are embedded within their majors that make a student marketable for whatever professions that they end up pursuing. And there's a big chunk of work that needs to happen in that space for this to have an impact on the economy down the line. So I'm wondering about the validity of measuring the interdisciplinary as a measure of how closely the majors are aligning to education. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm really glad you called that out because it isn't sufficient. This one measure doesn't address that problem. If you're not helping students understand what it is they learned that's valuable, and I think this is similar to what Roman's saying in the chat, that you really have to be able to package this and help students be able to articulate it. Similarly, the colleges need to play that role. The colleges need to engage the employers and say, when you see a major within, an education degree from our college, this is how it relates to what you are looking for in your workers, so that you absolutely, this is not sufficient. However, I can tell you that I've been in far too many guided pathways conversations where people say, oh, we're going to have all these meta majors, and then we're going to have the undecided meta major where you never have to choose. And if you can't articulate the coherent set of skills, then you are doing those students a disservice. If you have an interdisciplinary major that is a general social sciences, like we're going to teach you a little bit of all of the ologies, that might be different. But I think, unfortunately, a lot of the students that are earning interdisciplinary awards, it's like a game of bingo. They just happen to hit all the right squares, and all of a sudden, whoa, someone's like, hey, you can have an award. Or somebody just sticks around for a really long time, and we encourage them to keep coming, just take a few more classes, and then all of a sudden their count of units is way higher than it needs to be, because we keep saying, oh, we've got this other degree that we can give you, but we don't even know the value of it of ourselves. There may be examples where that is a carefully constructed major that aligns with a particular set of transfer requirements that's not covered by an ADT. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about when we hand someone a piece of paper where we can't even articulate the value. But again, I was asked to come up with a measure, one thing that you could measure that could be counted, and that's how I ended up with this. But I'm really glad you talked about it, because this is the problem with metrics, is that you think that just because you're looking at one thing, like the metric of the number of units that students earned, is brilliant, because it starts you thinking about, why does a student have 97 credits? And then you might say to yourself, oh, they actually left here with 2 associate's degrees. Why did we do that? What is the value of a double major with an associate's degree? Maybe that would have been better for them to go on and get a bachelor's degree. It starts those conversations, but you have to be ready with the next set of things to make sure that it moves the change, right?
You were saying this one, Kathy, before I went back for Carlos.
Yeah, just it's really important to be able to look at who is in which majors as much as you're looking at if students are moving into a specific major to address those equity gaps, because we do see differences. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then I think I'd actually done this. That the idea is that we're really trying to get people to a specific program of study, which means, to Carlos's point, that you have to be able to articulate what those skills are, both for students and for employers. Next slide. And so that was how I got to this idea that what you'd be measuring is the proportion of students who have this non-specific major. I'd originally said having that award only. I know some of you have been doing a little bit of digging, and you realize there's some real discrepancies among the colleges about how these non-specific awards get used. So you could just say if they're happening at all, because I would argue that if you're giving this to the student on top of another award, really figure out why. Is it about counting things for us, for the funding formula, a vestige of that bad data definition, or is it really something meaningful? So one of the things that I really, when I come up with an idea like this, is to say, well, what do you think it would mean? So if you said everybody has to figure out a way to report this, or we're going to pull this number for you from Data Mart, and then you have to talk about it, is to be sure that you can identify the value for the conversations that you are trying to have. So that was the question I wanted to pose to all of you. Like, if you were starting to have a conversation on this data point, how would it relate to the conversations you need people to be focused on? So how would it relate to college and career planning if you were trying to encourage people to ensure that students don't end up in the non-specific major?
I'll speak up. You're asking us us, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, we're struggling with this a lot at Chafee right now. In fact, this is the purpose of our semester, is to sort of tackle this issue of the exploratory and that sort of safe year. And how do we transition students who are non-specific into specific majors? For the college and career planning, that's the crux of it. And then how do you scale college and career planning so that it's a requirement, so it's targeted and effective and fast. So it happens within that first semester for an undecided student, and it's thorough, especially when the labor market is so complex. You could get a dissertation just trying to understand its dynamics. And how do we really, give students the ability to make informed choices about such a complex tapestry of choices? That's that. But at the very least, college and career planning needs to be scalable for a college, that has 26,000 students like ours, and that is not an easy staffing problem to manage.
Mm-hmm. Roman is saying more greater access to career exploration in K-12, often embedded in pathways and academies, but targeted to the theme of pathways and not generalized, and often inaccessible to students not in pathways. And we found in some of the other data we shared in the workshops that point as well, Roman, a connection between majors and career interests too. So if you ask a student what their major was, that would be different than asking them what they wouldn't know how to get there through a major to their career interest. There's very little understanding about that, as there is for many of us really, but particularly the students that were on the CCGI platform.
So at RCC, we're, as part of our program review, we're actually looking at who gets awards demographically, or even who's enrolled in upper division courses demographically. So we know there are no women that are getting math ADT. We know that there are no African Americans that are enrolled in upper division chemistry courses. So having those specific conversations, we're not sure what to do about it yet, but at least, we're recognizing that we have some major gaps. I've also been on the LCAP for our K-12 for Redlands Unified, and they are trying to look at their pathways, particularly their CTE pathway, because it's largely at the K-12 for the high schools. It's largely the lower income students who are in those CTE. And it's weird because, and community colleges have been struggling with this for years, but a lot of people think, well, that's great. That's a pathway to immediate employment. But again, like Kathy said, they're being tracked into that pathway where maybe they actually should be in a STEM pathway. But LCAP has the data for that, and that's publicly available and is being discussed as well.
Yeah, it's part of the career and college dashboard indicator. It's one of the ways that the student can complete that is a CTE pathway, plus they have to have some of the content expertise too, to get a okay or, prepared ticket. I think this indicator is an important indicator. I think that there's value in looking at this and creating a movement to move students towards a more coherent program. I think that we've articulated very clearly why students are found in this particular position. But I also think, I also think that the effort to align the majors with the workforce or with careers through the lens of skills, and that development of that course of work or that body of work is more important than looking at the number of students and interdisciplinary efforts. I think that that's a great incentive, but it's a great initiative. But if the programs are not there then we still have the same problem that we had when they're in the interdisciplinary major to begin with. And right now we are poised in our region to start thinking about this workforce and education alignment. It is bubbling up from the faculty, this idea of pillar 5, right? And if you're not in the guided pathways work, the guided pathways work is about 4 pillars, but faculty and others are now talking about the pillar 5, which is the transition either to a 4-year or transition to the workforce. And now they're beginning to talk about how I make my class, my math class I teach at the college, align with this. And we need to be able to look at how we move forward in that particular space. When we talked about this idea at the very beginning, and when we decided that we were going to put resources behind it, we started with the Nevada project. We replicated that in the IE. Lots of great traction with that. People found a lot of value in that. The idea that we could help support the faculty and help support the faculty align their courses and their degrees with workforce and find a way to track that across the region in a simple way, like Kathy recommends. I think that's a higher priority than going down this path. But I'd be willing to discuss this with anybody. And I don't have a solution.
I think Carlos, I think we're all on the same page as you in a lot of important ways. I think that when we did this kind of journey, we have found our team has been working on a skills kind of lens for a while now, because we think it holds a lot of promise. The problem is that colleges are not quite there yet. We're working with Matt at Chafee, for instance, to kind of dig in a little deeper of like, what would this mean if you were using skills data to inform your meta majors as well as your learning outcomes? What would that be? How would that work? So I think it's maybe for me anyway, and thinking about this with Sorrel for the last few months is like a both and, in terms of like knowing where other people can plug in. I think what we're finding is that the skills data isn't quite there yet. We have JobSpeaker online in the IE now. We have some of the data that West has been pulling. We have some work happening, and yet I think we don't really know where we don't have the buy-in or understanding about why a cohesive skill set or competencies and programs of study are really important. The difference between, like the Kathy's describing, majoring in business and majoring in interdisciplinary studies, what it seems to do for us anyway, and kind of the logic that we've had in thinking about it, is that you have to unpack that by race and gender, and then you have to unpack all programs of study, and then you have to understand what benefits there really are. Because the data that we shared over the last few months is that there isn't a linear path through a program to a job. That's very rare, except it's inside a CTE. What's more likely is people are picking up skills here and there, both in programs that they're in, as well as their employment. They're together getting some kind of cohesiveness. That's why I think the JobSpeaker data will be very interesting to look at, to see how students are kind of piecing that together to actually get employability skills. But until we have better data, we were kind of, I think, intellectually interested in this, but also thinking about how the segments could work better together if they had a place to work. Because what we've heard from the K-12s is we don't really know what these meta major things are. We don't really know what guided pathways are. We're really not sure how to plug in yet. I think we have some places that we could probably look at with a similar strategic measure that could be a starting place. And to Sorrel's point, I think it's definitely a leading and not the lagging. We're not saying that that's the end goal, but it could help us, because the data is consistent, help us have different kinds of conversations about the employability skills, around competencies, around the whole exploration piece that we need to kind of get at. But the data just isn't there yet to know what we're measuring. So in the question that you had, Carlos, just one more, sorry. The question is, what data do we have to support that kind of work around the skills? And that's what we were grappling with, and be interested to hear what other people have to say about, like, if we know that skills are important, what do we use?
So I think one of the challenges that we have about measuring things is that we've got a really sloppy way of looking at it as an industry, like the education sector. Like, so in K-12, we were really focused for the longest time, even at the beginning of community college, on tests, as if that was going to give us the data points that we needed to make decisions. And then we got really into dashboards, which is this measure that I gave you is a dashboard metric. It's something that comes out of administrative data that you could put on some pie charts or some graphs and you could take a look at. And that's really helpful when you're trying to get people to think about an issue differently, but it doesn't help you change it. So you're absolutely right. Like, if you don't have appropriate skills data assigned to every major, and you're not in conversation with employers and students about what those are, how that manifests in the curriculum, how you know that people are actually ready, there's no point, right? So what you'd really want to do, I think, at this point is figure out what would help you have the right conversation. So one of the doorways into the right conversation is to have everybody talk about this metric and then have a whole plan for how you unpack it, so that people start to say, oh, it's not just that they get an award, it's not just completion, it's completion of something coherent. Or if we don't want people to end up in interdisciplinary studies, we have to start with our K-12 partners so that they aren't thinking about this for the first time when they first get to us in that first year. But it doesn't actually matter what you pick. It's the scaffolding of the conversations. And I think that Rachel is right. The challenge is the skills data is new. People are still trying to figure out how to approach it. People still think it's a CTE thing. So as long as you have a clear theory of action for measurement, that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
Just to Dr. Ayala's point, I'd also just like to add, I do think it's concurrent. The challenge of the interdisciplinary degree from a purely administrative perspective at the colleges is that you have no control over creating discrete learning outcomes or skill sets within those degrees, because of the fact that they're cut across departments. At least with specific majors, there's some organizing principles from an administrative structure that you can drill down into and get some coherence around. I think the interdisciplinary majors, we just have to like wipe those from the board completely in order to even deal with specific majors and intentional skill sets within those domains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what we're curious about in general, is if you were to just to look at the data based on what Kathy's saying, if you disaggregated by race, what we've seen preliminarily in other regions or in other studies is that there are certain groups of students that are getting tracked, for lack of better words, into interdisciplinary studies for the reasons. I like your description that you put in the chat, Matt, about you kind of have all these credits and you're trying to get a students not to drop out. I think that's where we think it could be an interesting and important equity lens to put inside of these conversations. It's not the thing you want to do in the ultimate, but it will unpack some of these other conversations around who is in these degrees and how many credits do they have. I mean, kind of on the heels of the RP group's been studying the transfer problem for a while in terms of like who's not getting through that transfer gate. And we know that there's some serious equity issues, and that the amount of credits that students of color are accumulating are disproportionate with students that are Asian and white. There seems to be something going on around this, and interdisciplinary studies can help us unpack some of those conversations around what credits students are getting and in what. Because I think when we just focus on how many credits students are getting, but not what they're in, we obviously are not. This is not a guided pathway. This is a credit accumulation. And that's where we're trying to get at, like, what's a measure we could maybe start looking at to unpack some of those other important pieces.
Wendy and Matt, what % of your academic programs are aligned with the workforce?
About a third of our students are enrolled in CTE programs.
I'm not talking about CTE. I'm talking about academic programs, not CTE. That divides a different divide, and we're not talking about that divide, though. I think we need to bring those two together. And
I'm not sure how to respond to your question.
No, I actually think CTE is the appropriate answer, and the reason why is I totally get your point about not wanting to disaggregate those two and to focus on career broadly conceived. However, currently CTE pathways are really the only college academic pathways that are by mandate discretely aligned to workforce, because of where they get their funding, because of how they're coded. So as a result of that, it ends up being that about a third of the students are enrolled. Those are the programs that we can identify.
Right. So let me rephrase my question then. What percent of your academic programs have identified the skills that students would find useful if they get that major in future careers?
I don't want to say zero, but I'm tempted to say zero.
But how do you know?
I think that's precisely the issue. I mean, we've been digging on this, and you know, every department has learning outcomes. Every program has identified those learning outcomes. However, those learning outcomes are not research driven in relation to workforce needs. So that's why I'm going to go with zero on that.
Right.
And we are doing, and I don't know, Carlos, if you're aware.
I'm not arguing. I have 70,000 seniors graduating in the IE this next year, right? A big chunk of them are going to go into the community colleges, and some of them are going to go into this interdisciplinary major because they're going to be there for 3 or 4 years, and they're going to talk to a counselor, and the counselor is going to see this path, and they're going to move them on, right? I know that's
going to happen,
right? But I also know these 70,000 seniors are going to their bio major hoping that they will get a good degree down the line. Kathy showed us how the STEM majors, a big chunk of them, end up in these non-STEM related areas. And it's that alignment issue that in the academic space that we really need to hone in on. I want to deal with the CTE thing too, but that's a different thing right now. But it's just thinking about that alignment. How do we push that forward now? And what I'm trying to process right now in my mind is this conversation that Kathy is having, that is proposing that by showing the interdisciplinary major and creating an action plan of pushing kids out, is that going to create the alignment in the other spaces? And I just don't know about the validity of that argument. I don't know to the extent at which that is going to happen. And yeah, so I just leave it at
Well,
that.
if you stopped at just saying, if we just change this number, we're golden, you're nowhere. You know, because we know exactly where those students are going to go, because the ADTs being offered are disproportionately right back in the social sciences, and every incentive in the system is going to push people toward the ADTs, both because you get more money if your student gets one, and because for the student, they're like, oh my God, I actually know what to take. And because it's compelling.
They want a program.
Yeah, if you're trying to understand your world right now, man, psychology, sociology, those things really help understand what the heck is going on, right? So we're going to see that happen if you don't put these other things in place. Honestly, I am not a proponent of coming up with numbers that sit on dashboards. I've spent 10 years building them, and I am really clear how very, very limited they are. So if what is going to make a difference is that you're doing hand-holding technical assistance with colleges to convince them that they need to have clear evidence-based alignment of skills to jobs for the IE, please go do that.
That would be great.
The question is just, can you get the folks on the ground to understand why that's important? And what I'm hearing is that you're beginning to get a groundswell. So just like run with that. Wherever you see it happening, figure out how people are making sense of those issues locally and grow it. And it's probably going to be different at Chaffey than it's going to be at Moreno Valley. You know, it's different in different places. And that's the problem, is that some cultures are primed for this. Chaffey's been wrestling with your interdisciplinary major. I came and talked to you all like 5 years ago, and Laura Hope flagged that for me as something that she really wanted to see addressed. Other colleges won't even have thought of it yet, and others have already gotten rid of it.
Right.
What's happening at the colleges that have gotten rid of it?
Their enrollment isn't going down.
I don't know.
I
just know that when I pulled the data, I saw real variability in colleges.
I know we're coming up on time. So I know this, well, I could go on with this one forever. I love this conversation. but I think it would be helpful. Maybe Sorrel, do you have some ideas about how to move some next steps or things that we could maybe take from here that'll help you all and help us learn together? I do want to say that we are, because of an introduction that Leslie made for us to Matt, we are kind of beta testing these ideas at Chafee. Allie just created a dashboard around skills that I'm going to share with Matt soon as we get something on the books. And so we are interested to see how colleges actually do this on the ground with skills. I don't think this is an either or situation. It's a different speed because of the issues we've been talking about.
Yeah, I would echo that. You know, this is exactly the kind of conversation we were hoping to have, sort of like, what would this mean? What does this look like? And really the idea being, you know, it's not a measure because that's the end all be all, but like, what are the conversations that it would trigger? And then the movement around that. And so, I mean, I think we need to do some thinking to imagine, if not this measure, is there something else that could serve that same purpose? Do we need a measure to do that? It seems to me that, you know, like having something to organize around and rally around is useful, especially when you're working intersegmentally. Something simple, something measurable. So I think we probably need to just do some more thinking about what might that look like, and if not this measure, is there anything else? But especially, yeah, what would we do with it? And think that through a little bit more. And possibly, you know, we could, if some of this is already going to be happening at Chafee, we could help support that and piggyback on that and sort of, you know, pilot it or something, you know, just see how that works in one space.
Yeah, it's also, and I think I just want to give, I've learned a lot from you all the last few months, and I want to say thank you to the Inland Empire and broadly for hosting West Ed the last few months and doing these meetings. I learned a tremendous amount. I met some amazing people. I also want to say that you all you're about to have a lot more data soon. So it's about trying to get ahead of that. I mean, I think you, with the penetration that CCGI has in the Inland Empire, that you have job speaker functioning at some of the major colleges. I think there's some systemic pieces that are coming online. And if we can learn together through something like at Chafee's, a pilot at Chafee, I think you all will be in a different data environment, I think soon. But I think what we were trying to find was an efficient measure now, so you don't have to wait for the data and try to unpack it later on. I think Job Speaker and now CCGI are now know each other, and as a result of this, and are talking about some of those interactions. I certainly have benefited a lot from being on the ground, more so with some of your colleges that are learning. So I think we're in a really good, you all have a lot that's about to happen with as far as data. And I want to say thank you for being so generous. All of you have been really amazing partners on this project. So thank you, Sorrel especially. And thank you, Kathy, for being willing to share this measure with us.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody too. I'm passionate about this because I know my kids are hurting, and I really want to move forward on this. Can a couple people stay on? I have another question for you. Should we repeat the data workshop with a new set of people? Does that seem like a smart thing to do? Just anybody thoughts?
I'd be curious what Matt and Leslie and folks that are kind of on the practitioner side, closer to the, and Kimberly was a part as well.
Well,
I don't see any.
I think you should do it.
I think getting more attendees, more outreach, maybe utilizing Leslie and the foundation. I'm not sure like what pipelines can be tapped into, but that, yeah, I think more information would be better for sure.
Yeah, I think and from listening to my students last semester, we had conversations about transferring, because most of the students that come to Cal State are transfer students. There's a lot. I think there's a lot of institutional issues that I don't think we quite understand on how it's really functioning for the students. I think it's kind of clunky sometimes, and they try and get in, and one of my students shared that all of her counselors were telling her she was just fine. And then the system came back and said, no, you are not, you can't get your degree. You're not going to graduate. She was given the wrong advice by multiple counselors and had to take it all the way up to, you know, the highest in administrative levels, because she's a kind of a go-getter and is going to make it. So even like an institutional review of how it's working for our students, I think is missing. And even for Cal State, you know, how is it really working for us? Because we all think we have all these great programs, but what's really happening is not clear to me. So with that in mind, another sort of comprehensive look at what does the data mean within the pathway. And I'll be very quick. Within the pathway itself, we have these dual enrollment courses for these students in high school. But how many are actually getting credit for the college level? I will tell you, very few. So they're taking college level courses at the high school, but they're not getting any credits for them. And at the community college level, not even thinking about for the university level. So I think there's some fundamental issues that need to be looked at. And I only attended one of the data workshops, but it was great. I think it was really helpful, and it's interesting to get people to think about data and what it means, and then how do you interpret it, and then what do you really collect. And as a qualitative researcher, I always think that the best data is some of the most difficult data to actually understand or to collect. I'll leave it at there. But thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Collins.
I think for me, and I can't speak for Angelica, unfortunately, she had to leave early, but I know that it's a lot for our GP leads and our GP teams to take in. And so, but I do know that they would find value in it, as well as our student equity leaders, you know, because it's something else that they can look at. It's another data point that they can look at. And because they are our Region 9 student equity leaders, that perhaps that's something that they can consider and advocate and push for back at their college. So I feel like this point for me, my business is brokering information and connections. So I'm all about deepening this conversation and just it has to be much more targeted at the college, because we can send it out to all the researchers and it may not light a fire, right? But, you know, we'd have to find like that 1 or 2 or 3 people that this resonates with them, and then they could be our champion. So I'm all up for continuing this conversation and just very excited about being more strategic about it. I'd love, Matt, I always love you, Matt, you know, catching up with Matt and seeing like, okay, how is this resonating with Chafee? What are the tangible things? Like, what are some plans? What are some thoughts? Because that's also going to inspire our colleges, right? To understand that it's possible.
We do have another, and I can talk to Sorrel about this offline, but we have been working through with Leslie's counterpart up here, Catherine Bergman, around kind of a more college specific community of practice approach to skills. So I'd be happy to share the outline with Sorrel and talk about like what that would take. But it's a much more tangible way to get on the ground and get people talking about this. Because I think what our whole thing, our little team at WestEd is all about, more people at the college being thinking it's their job to get students career education and focus. Like we want everyone at the college, I think that's their business. And that's going to take a while, because some faculty are not on that line of thinking yet. So there's some both faculty and programs of study that are much more ready, and there's a much more fertile ground in some places. And we have found the strategy that we've been thinking about recently has been CTE folks that are on guided pathway teams. That seems to be the people that are getting kind of these skills conversations in a different way. So I'm sure we could find a handful of those folks in the IE to just share some of our thoughts and resources, and maybe that could be places that they can take some of these ideas back to their guided pathway team. Not everyone's at the mindset, like to Kathy's point, it's not there yet.
That sounds really interesting, Rachel. It makes me think that this was really deliberately, this series was deliberately intersegmental, but there might be some work to be done, with college conversations, as either a separate set of conversations, sounds like.
Mhm.
Well, thank you all. This has been great, and this is going to really, really propel us forward here. And I really appreciate all of the intellectual capacity and effort that all of you have done to make this happen. So good.
Yeah,
good
thank
job.
you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Friday.
Give me a few minutes, Lori.
Hi, Sorrel.
Hi, do
Allie.
you want to stop recording and chat for a sec?
Let's